So the other week, the Reddit Formula1 community invited me to be a part of their first Reddit Talks, titled A Night with Red Bull. The conversation featured the F1 Reddit hosts Anil and Jeppe, along with 2 former Red Bull racing employees, myself and the F1 Twitter superstar meme lord, Engine Mode 11. If you have any questions or suggestions for content that you'd like to see on this channel in the future, don't hesitate to leave me a comment below. Enjoy the video. So I moved from Texas to the UK in 2011, get a job in motorsport. I wanted to be a Formula 1 engineer, so I said, why not? Let's try it. Went to Oxford Brookes University, got a motorsport master's degree, and somehow after that landed a job at Force India. So has become Sahara Force India Racing Point, and now is Aston Martin. I worked there for 3 years. Most of that time I spent as a trackside performance engineer working on Di Resta's car and then Perez's car. I then moved to Red Bull Racing. I worked with Kvyat and Verstappen. So I was Verstappen's performance engineer for the first year when he was at Red Bull. Then after 2017, I moved back to the factory to focus more on development and worked in the simulator performance engineering group. And then November this year, I decided I wanted to take a break and explore some other aspects of life. So I play mostly Warzone. I play Escape from Tarkov. I make YouTube and TikTok content, and I'm just trying to enjoy life and do something a bit different. So I've only worked at 2 teams in my career. I worked at Force India, which was a very hardworking small team that had to be very efficient and calculated and conservative at everything they did because they didn't have a lot of cash. But again, a great small team environment. You know, you felt like one of the people making a difference. Fast forward to Red Bull, I felt very much the same thing. It was just like the same. Everybody pushing in the same direction, more money, more resource, so you could throw a bit more firepower at your problems that you had, for example, and be a little bit more explorative, let's say, and sometimes scattergun throw a lot of different solutions at a problem and see what worked. The culture and everything else, it was awesome. I don't have anything to complain about. I didn't leave because I didn't like working there. I left because I wanted to do something else. Like there's no blame culture. When something goes wrong, everybody figures it out and nobody gets thrown under the bus. I thought it was a great place to work, and I honestly, if I went back to motorsport, I would consider going back there. Yeah, I think that was mostly self-imposed though, because I'd only been in the industry for a couple years, and you look up and down the grid and you're like, that's a winning team right now. Obviously, the first year of the V6s, the Mercedes was pretty impressive and spectacular. But yeah, it was going from one of the midfield teams to going to work for one of the big boys. And yeah, I mean, at the time, I took the job going to be Seb's performance engineer, and then obviously Seb went to Ferrari that year that I joined the team. Felt like a big step, and like that was the shot, you know. Yeah, I mean, I think definitely in the early 2000s, it was definitely the party team. And then as the team found success, the team starts looking, they're not throwing all these huge, crazy parties, but most of the teams aren't. The whole sport is getting so much more serious. The schedule's getting more condensed. There's a lot more work on, and it's not sustainable to goof around that much. And they're a serious team. They're taking everything very seriously now. But that doesn't mean it's not a great place to work. So in my last job, I worked in the simulator performance group. So conceptual stuff that was coming, be it aero, chassis, suspension, shaking stuff down, making sure it worked, offering feedback and developing that. I'm not going to go into any detail on that, but from a simulator performance development point of view, we had access to all the stuff and put the car together in the virtual world, test it with the test drivers, see how everything works, and just the same thing that every single team is doing when they develop a new car is, you've got new tires, you've got new aero, a new chassis, new suspension. The suspension system was much more simple. So you go through and work through all the problems and explore the car and see what new problems you might come up with, or issues you have from balance or limitations, or I didn't notice that when I was running the simulations offline. That was really what I did. But in terms of the nitty gritty of what actually happened, it was a continuous process that started, dribs and drabs 6-7 months ago in our world. By the time it got to us, that doesn't mean like wind tunnel, everybody else hadn't been looking at this stuff for ages. It gets to us in the simulator and we go through it. It was different. It offered some new challenges and changes, but at the end of the day, once you figured out where the things were, a lot of the problems we were solving were the same problems that we were always working on. Yes, building up a new car in the virtual world is fun and exciting, and it's for example, say you've had, what was it, the RB16B, which was just second year of the same car, more or less. There wasn't that much new and exciting happening with that car. It was more just weekend on weekend stuff for that chassis. But for the new car, yeah, it was cool seeing the different performance windows, how the car needed to operate, and finding those things out from the first time. You know, it was the first time we'd had a new car in 2 years. I think the trackside thing was for engineers and for most of the people traveling is pretty hardcore. I mean, let's call it a European race. You're flying Wednesday afternoon. You land Wednesday night. If you don't get in late, you maybe go out for a meal and a drink with the team or the guys and gals. Thursday, pretty normal setup day at the track, day 0. You're probably out of there. If there's a sketch or something, you might be out of there at 10 o'clock. 11 o'clock, but usually you're out of there by 7 or 8 o'clock. That might include if you've got all your work done going for a run or a cycle around the circuit. That's pretty common to see a lot of the personnel on the weekends, Thursday nights, Saturday nights. Fridays are hardcore. Fridays are 7 a.m. to whatever the curfew is now, midnight or something. Saturday, early start, but you might get out in time to go for a run, and definitely Saturday night you get time for a meal and drink because there's parc ferme and the covers are on the cars from, I think it's like 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening now. And then Sunday's Sunday's weird. Sunday looks like show up to work, breakfast, some stuff happens, maybe some meetings, breakfast part 2 or lunch. It seems like it's bizarre. And then the race happens, and then it's really glamorous getting changed in the car park and then flying to the airport. And then you're back in the office on Monday. Yeah, sometimes, like, definitely, like, if something like super goes wrong, like, people are going to try and help out when they can, but for the most part, like, the paddock is also, people change teams often, especially trackside, so you might see someone that you've worked with at a previous team that's now at a different team down the road, and you might have a chat, or you might go for a run, or you might meet up for a drink on Thursday or Saturday night or whatever. So yeah, that's usually how it goes. You'll meet people that you used to work with that now work with another team, and then you might meet some of their colleagues or whatever. Well, I think there's a few big differences. If you want to talk about the past, in the past, there were T-car teams. You had a race engineer, test engineer, data engineers, all a whole different car build team which serviced the test cars. And, you know, even further back, you had 3 cars running at a weekend. How long ago was that? Jeez. But like now, you're 23, 24 races a year. Not very many tests, but you have stuff happening like triple headers. What is a triple header? Like, seriously. So as far as the longevity of traveling personnel, and I don't think people also appreciate, at every race there are a number of people who offer factory support throughout the whole weekend. So just because they're not at the track does not mean they're not working weekends. Those are IT, those are electronics, they're systems people, they're controls engineers, they're engine people, they're aerodynamicists. They're at the factory working the same hours as the people at the track. The people, I think, for the most part, people that say, oh, it's a dream job, I would do it, are the people that probably wouldn't last very long doing it, because it's insanely stressful, it's high pressure, it's a lot of work, and it's nonstop. You're in and out of hotels, airports, people think you're going all over the world, seeing all the cool places. Yeah, you do get to see some cool stuff, but you're looking at 24 to 28 weeks a year away. And like, you know, I spend probably another month of my time every year back in Texas with my family, so, you know, to go see my parents and my brother. So it's like, great, you're looking at something like 36 weeks a year away from wherever your house is. It's nutty. And I think it'll be interesting to see what happens, because I'm just talking about the engineers, the mechanics and technicians and stuff have even longer. The people that go up and set up, tear down, prep the cars all weekend. Oh, it's mental. It's mental. And that was my motivation for stopping traveling is, you know, I'd spent 6 years in a row of my life, spent most of those years on the road. Like, there's people that love it and it's their life, and I just happened to realize that I loved it, but it wasn't going to be my life, if that makes sense. Nah, not really. And it wasn't one of those I can't do this anymore. It's just one of those I don't want to be 3 years further into this thinking, being honest with yourself, in the back of your head, it's like, right, I'm not as crazy about this as I once was. And there's a lot of really young, hungry people at the factory that want a shot at this job. Why don't I go back to the factory, support them? I can get a little bit of my, my free time back. I get most of my weekends back and everything else and approach from that way. So it wasn't like one of those like, I hate this, I want to quit now. It was like, I should probably stop now before I get sucked in for 3 more years and wonder where the time went. I think for the most part, you kind of start with an impetus for a change. Like what's the change? For example, this year, 2 big things: aerodynamic regulations, tires. So you've got a lot of aerodynamics work going on. You've got a lot of packaging work going on, and those are driving most of the changes. And then from those changes, you're going to your suspension and performance group saying, right, we need the suspension that does this, and Aero wants the suspension legs like this. Back and forth iterative process. Defining goals and targets at a performance level. Like, what do you need the car to do? Okay, we can only tolerate this much. Iterate. Stuff like, for example, the steering wheel and electronics. Those are decoupled from those kind of problems. The aerodynamic regulations and the wheel change don't really impact the steering wheel. So some stuff stays the same. And then you've got very strict groups allocated to doing, sections of the car aerodynamically, surfaces, flows, cooling. You've got suspension people doing how the things work mechanically. You've got stress people saying, right, are these things strong enough for the loads we think we're going to take? The vehicle dynamics people are telling them what the loads are likely to be given what they know about the tires and aero and everything else. So it's this huge kind of like circular process, but there's usually a couple, like your chief designer and the deputy and then heads of department will often kind of correlate all that information, discuss what needs to be done, divvy up the work down the chain to their subordinates. The car will end up in the simulator at some point, and they'll say, okay, well, we had a question about this thing. Will this work? Will this car handle well? And the simulator group will come back and say, possibly yes, possibly no, with some varying degree of certainty on how much they trust the current aero map and the current tire model and everything else. And everybody has a discussion, and technical director, chief designers, anybody else get involved and say, right, here's how we're going to step forward. Do we agree on this? Does this seem reasonable? Iterate again and again and again. I think it's a lot more streamlined than that, but in general, for the most part, that's how the processes go. There's so many back and forths between aero and everything. And a lot of the time, this stuff is completely dictated by the regulations. You see, a lot of the cars in certain areas look very similar. Those things are quite prescribed. Then you have teams like vastly differing, shapes of their car between the Ferrari and the Mercedes, for example. Those are different interpretations and maybe even solving different problems. I just want to say that since being here, I am 300% more passionate about roundabouts. Honestly, I've got to be honest with you, being an American, moving to the UK, I lived in Oxford for 6 years, and it was a small place. Like Oxford is a college town. Getting something from the grocery store or hardware store is a task sometimes. It's like, well, I can't have a car in the city, or, getting my car, 2 miles away to this store is a disaster. Whereas Milton Keynes, I've got access to anything I want. The only thing that does suck is like if I wanted to go for, most things, I need to drive there. I can't hop on a bus necessarily. Also because I live outside of Milton Keynes, but it's a convenient city. It's not bad. Nothing super amazing about it either, though. But there's nothing crap about it either. Formula Student is an excellent platform because at most traditional engineering universities and schools, you do not learn very many automotive or even motorsport principles. So it gives you something most often it's outside of the curriculum of the university. It might be a course or special credit, but in my instance, it was completely volunteer, and I spent a substantial amount of time on that. And that was kind of what started this passion to try and get a job in Formula 1 in the first place. So I learned a lot. Did it help me get a job? Absolutely. Was it necessary for me to do Formula SE and Formula Student in order to get a job in Formula 1? No, it wasn't. But it helped me learn a lot of stuff at a introductory level. I learned a lot of design stuff, which I haven't used in ages. It was honestly, I'd love to talk about Formula Student for hours on end. I know a lot of people from Formula Student who are in Formula 1 now. I'll put it that way. And I know lots of people who did not contribute any to Formula Student or Formula C from their universities who are also in Formula 1. So if anybody's interested, definitely look around on the internet at Formula Student, Formula C. If there's any young people that are interested in that kind of career path. It's one of my favorite experiences from university, both in Texas and in the UK. It's something you should definitely consider. Well, for the most part, you can't, from Parc Fermé regulations, you can change very little. So the changes that you can make are flap angle change. Depending on those restrictions on where your tire pressures are, you might be operating at the minimums already, so you might not be able to change those. And if it's tires, those have probably already been set. You might be able to do a bleed. And then other than that, most of the stuff in qualifying will be control systems adjustments, such as brake balance, diff, and engine braking, and talking about, okay, use this switch or this toggle for this corner or that. But if it's one of those things where you're like last minute, right, we didn't plan on doing another run, it's coming up to the line, come in, fuel the car, go for the next run, not a lot's going on, and you might even be lucky to show the driver an overlay, if it's one of those super snappy turnarounds. And that's really all it is. The mechanics and everything else, it's a perfectly orchestrated machine. Everybody knows what they're doing, and if it's a fast one, people know exactly what to expect and what not to do. Honestly, a lot of the stuff is very close, but you don't model so many of the variables all the time, so you're kind of dealing with a little bit of noise. But for the most part, teams should have very well correlated simulation packages. New cars will have initially lower fidelity, but as the season progresses, they will fine-tune various aspects of the models, be it stuff they haven't modeled or stuff they didn't know was happening that they needed to add to the detail of whatever tire, chassis, suspension, aerodynamics model that they've got. But the simulations are pretty good. The simulator fidelity, very good. But it's always a moving target, and if it's good, you want it to be better. I think, in short, mine was on my first day of work is in vehicle dynamics at Force India, and I showed up and I spent my first 2 days in the 7-post rig. They were doing some suspension tests on the VJM. I don't remember which one it was, but it was white and orange and green, and it was like, wow. Yeah, that was one of those things. It's like, wow, I'm here. Like, as a Formula student alum, you get the Formula student car on the 7-post rig or the 4-post rig and check all the suspension and do all the sweeps and tests. And it's like, wow. And then you're like, wait, I'm here. I'm at the Force India factory on the 7-post rig with the race car. There's an actual Formula 1 car right there, and they're not getting mad when I touch it. The stuff that you can get from the API is timing sectors and GPS loop data. From the actual car, from your own car, you have, I don't like that, this was my bread and butter, but, a lot of sensors, and then you're converting using some clever physics and math and calculations, you're converting that into more meaningful performance-related channels. The amount of data that you generate is substantially way too much to look at in a raw form, unless you isolate it down to a very specific subset of a system or something else. And then even that, trying to boil all that down into meaningful stuff is an art in itself. And turning data into information is the name of the game. How much time you got is the answer to that. There's so much information. The stuff that you can get from the API is definitely very useful to give you a broad overview of performance characteristics of a car and where people are fast and slow. But to understand actually what's causing that, the telemetry data that the teams have access to, the push rod loads, which you can calculate thousands of things from. You've got speed sensors, you've got aerodynamic pressure sensors. The amount that you can learn from those things is almost limitless. Yeah, that was something that was very close to what a lot of the stuff I worked on from the track and the simulator, and it's probably the most exciting thing, I think, in the entire world. I've trimmed this video down just to some of the questions that I've answered, but I highly recommend you check out the full podcast and get involved with the Reddit Formula 1 community. I've left links in the description for both of these.